Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Tech Talk Tuesday. I'm Dan with Insane Forensics, and today we're going to talk about using MITRE ATT&CK, the ICS, and the enterprise version in industrial environments and why you should be using both. With us today is Ron Fabela from SynSaber. Thanks for joining us, Ron. How about you tell us a few things about yourself?
Thanks for having me, Dan. My name is Ron Fabela, co-founder, CTO at SynSaber, OT visibility product, but obviously a fan and someone who's interested in this environment, especially both from the enterprise and the OT side. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, Ron. So where we're going to start, we're going to do a quick overview in case you're not familiar with MITRE ATT&CK, either on the enterprise side or ICS side. So MITRE ATT&CK, it is a matrices of tools and techniques. And what it does on the enterprise side is really capture a lot of different tactics and techniques, common things that attackers do. So everything from persistence to exploitation, all the way through to scanning. It's really kind of a catalog and database of different techniques that you might use across different security disciplines. There's another matrix that's kind of an offshoot side of it, which is the industrial control side. This one focuses on some of the intricacies of a ICS network. And the goal here again is the difference from the enterprise side is this is supposed to better characterize some of the ICS nuance and ICS activities inside of those. A question we often get in the field and from customers on this is, do we use these together? Or do we use these exclusively? And this is actually kind of a big topic. There's a lot of opinions either way on this. And so part of today is actually us sharing our opinion. Ron and I have the same opinion on this. And so it's good, you'll hear, or it's good because today you'll hear at least two different opinions in the direction we're going in. So spoiler alert, we believe you should be using both. And we'll explain why as we jump into this. So a quote from George Box, British statistician. He's a statistician, but when you look at models, right, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And whether it be statistics and math, or whether it be IC model like attack used in cybersecurity, there's a lot of truth for this. He said this quote a few times. And a later extension that he said, I think he said this in the 70s, was, look, models are useful fiction. They're never going to exactly match, but there's huge progress that can be made in these approximations in trying to basically get close, and sometimes entertaining these fictions for the point of pushing ideas in the path forward. Where we see, kind of jumping straight into this, when you talk about security and when you talk about an attack, you're talking about risk. And there's really, when you have your traditional risk equation, you have impact, that what will happen, and probability, that question of will it happen. The other thing that we need to think of with this is possibility, right? Can it happen? MITRE ATT&CK is great because it gives us this catalog of kind of different techniques and things to think of as we do this risk equation. It can tell us like, hey, these are the possible things, and it can help with probability, saying, hey, we've seen this attacker use this. Of note, with probability, there is not a solid opinion on this. With possibility, we can get a system and test, yes, this exploit works. Yes, we can crash this service. Yes, we can pivot using this. So can it happen is more of a computer science problem oftentimes, where will it happen is more, well, we've seen it happen here. We think it'll happen here. It's more approximation. Impact in industrial space, what will happen? I want to say that's almost more of a HazOps or, a petroleum electrical engineering type deal. But when we think of risk in InfoSec, this diagram, why this is helpful is this helps us both classify and prioritize our risk, right? So when we look at impact, probability, and possibility together, the middle of this chart are things that are possible, probable, and impactful. These are our known and valuable risks and things that we think will happen. So these are things that a lot of times you definitely should take some security action against, right? If something is probable and impactful, but it's not possible, this is where our FUD, our fear, uncertainty, and doubt zone is, right? Someone's trying to scare you probably to make you buy something, but it turns out it's not actually possible, right? When you jump to your zone C, you have something that's possible and impactful, but it's not probable. This could either be because you don't know about it, it's underestimated, but it's still impactful. And we'll talk about why type C is important and where MITRE fits into that in a little later in here. Type D is your probable impossible, but not impactful. Again, these are things that could happen, but oftentimes it might not be financially worth actually dealing with these. These are known and low value risks. So Ron, any other thoughts on this?
Yeah, you really gets to the heart of the matter, especially with industrial, because it's overly physical processes. It's things you can touch and look and see. So impact tends to be measured really well, where maybe impact on the enterprise side is a little less known. But what's critical here is, possibility that can it happen? Much of my experience in ICS, security was really proving that things could happen where folks previously had just dismissed, like, well, this could never happen. Not even getting to probability. But what we're seeing now in the market is people are realizing things can happen and are happening in industrial. What the challenge is, though, is that if you're only looking at industrial and not both sides of the equation, it could really sway the other two kind of calculators in this equation here, where maybe if you underestimate the possibility, then you're going to discount the probability or even the impact of it happening because you go, well, it can't possibly happen. Um, Another funny thing, I like to use bad analogies, but the possible and impactful but not probable is like, well, could a hurricane, affect a power grid? Sure. Will it affect the power grid in Arizona? Probably not. That doesn't mean you don't have these procedures, but I think that's really when you get into the industrial space and you start to bring in real world examples, it helps kind of filter in or filter out the FUD and the noise of some of the things we're going to talk about. So.
Awesome. Thanks, Ron. Yeah, and where when you take these, and again, going back to kind of the risk things, why it's important to consider these three and why this is important in this talk is when we make security decisions, they're commonly made off risk. And with that risk, you oftentimes have this matrix here, right? Where you have probability on one side and you have impact on the other. Um, Common time or oftentimes you see possibilities when we added here, it's not on that table, but it's important to consider possibility with this because possibility also can certainly change the fact on this table. So one of the bold statements we're going to make first is if you only use one of the attack models, if you're only using attack ICS in an industrial network, or if for some reason you're only using the enterprise side, you're really only going to partially capture risk. And let's dive into that a bit. So about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago now, Mandiant put out this blog. I think they had done some research with MITRE on this, and they put out this blog. And something that really stuck out to me on this, and I actually show this blog when people bring up this question to me, but something that MITRE pointed out was, hey, this is great. Both models are great. By design, the ICS side, the OT side, really only hits some of the OT specific things going on, despite the fact that the same system still can be victim to that enterprise side. And what I really liked specifically in their blog was the image you see above, which, when you think about that Windows endpoint or that domain controller in your refinery or power plant or whatever your process is, it's the same version of Windows and it's the same, oftentimes, a lot of the same configuration that you have in enterprise. Yes, you do have ICS software. Yes, you have applications. Yes, you have that layer of human written code, of additional hardware, of everything else that adds risks in there. But you can't, it would be crazy to think like, oh, hey, somehow this version of Windows in this plant is different than every other version of Windows out there. Yes, there are some configuration differences sometimes, but it's still Windows at the end of the day with those service. Likewise, even when you go down to controllers, sometimes those controllers are running Nginx. They're running the same open source libraries that you see often out, even on quote unquote non OT devices or IoT devices. And so, the world is not a black or white, right? There's that gray area in between. And so if you only use one of the matrices, you're really only going to see one side of this chart, and you might see some of the purple, but you won't see the other side. So Ron, hop on in. I know
No,
you
it's
have some
a
great
it's a
experience.
great point because I think the practical nature as a former pen tester and attacker in these environments is um, you're not going straight to the industrial side of your attack equation, right? In order to act on objectives, you're pivoting down through the path of least resistance, which is your Windows systems. This is a lot of network based things. Most of your industrial protocols are just serialized protocols wrapped in encapsulated in IP. So the common techniques that you would see, maybe even from a purely enterprise attack stance, are being used in for the first 60, 80% of attacks in ICS. So to completely discount it, like I understand the maybe the inclination or need to specialize and to specifically call out, which is what ICS attack does. To discount it though, or just to discredit it out of the risk equation, it's absurd to me. Like it's because even if you look at some of the examples that in the upcoming slides of your common attacks, we can list off the first 10 steps that apply to enterprise systems almost exclusively. So I think it's critically important, and this is something that maybe not everyone realizes as they're getting into ICS from enterprise, or even ICS personnel that are getting into security. Most folks don't realize that 50, 60, 70% of their ICS environment, it looks like a Windows enterprise environment. And that's just the reality we're in now, especially as systems could modernize and converge in kind of the new industrial environments.
And something else to point out, and Rana and I were talking before we're recording this, and this also holds to some of the kill chain. The kill chain too is a model itself, and the focus of today's talk isn't the kill chain, but it's worth bringing up now. There's a lot of assumption of, hey, use enterprise attack for the IT side, and that'll protect your OT side definitely. But the reality is, Ron and I have both been out to sites to where it's direct connected to the internet for some reason, or they didn't know, or there's a lot of Sierra Wireless cellular cards a lot of places too. And so, you know, there are a lot of ways and a lot of plants out there that don't realize they're actually directly connected. So there's a big assumption again in these models that, oh, hey, IT can worry about enterprise attack. We're good over here in OT because we're good. And that's not the case. And even down to, like, if you're talking about something like phishing, which is used so commonly, some plants have email servers, so there's a lot of assumptions on, hey, everyone's going to be an O365, or hey, this system's sending email alerts, so there's actually an email server down. So
Yep.
again, with these models, that's why it's really important to use both. um, the
It's a
other
great
kind of
point.
Oh, go ahead, Ron.
I was going to say, because even if you're looking at a industrial, like a bottom up type of attack, um, it doesn't have to touch enterprise at all, like the enclave itself, but it's going to touch enterprise systems within the industrial enclave. And that's why it's important not just to segment your enterprise attack only for IT systems. Walking into a substation and plugging in a laptop, the first thing an attacker is going to do is very enterprise like attacks.
Yep. Exactly. And kind of expanding out to that, when we go back and we talk about those types of risks that we calculate out, right? Another important thing, and another thing that I think biases a lot of people in saying, well, we can just use one side or the other, um, is again how we calculate down to those risks, right? If we're going for those type A risks where we have both impact and possibility, where it can happen, and we know it's going to be bad with high probability. If we listen to a lot of the threat intel reports, if we listen to the news stories, some of the hypes out there, um, that'll help with those type A risks. And likewise, if we approach it purely from the computer science side, and we're reverse engineering, we're doing our red teaming of it. We're going to find those risks, kind of those type A risks. What's challenging and what happens when you listen or when you bias too much to one of these sides, though, is you miss those type C risks, right? The ones that are possible and impactful, but they're not probable. And this can either be because they're unknown. And so, like, a lot of 0 days technically would fall in here, or things that we don't know about, or just things we discount because we say, oh, that only happens in IT, that only happens in the other matrix. And we have to watch, again, bold statement 2, we have to watch that threat intel and can't happen here fallacy or bias, because type A and type C are both important. And if there's definitely that false feeling of security, if you're not considering both. So, Ron, any other thoughts on that? Or are you ready?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in environments where they say, well, Mimikatz, PS exec, that's an enterprise problem. So why even bother? And you're like, well, that's the first thing I'm using to pivot in and throughout your ICS network. So it's definitely a problem.
Yep. All right, next slide. So bold statement number 3 on here, anchoring risk probability only on one of the models, and not considering the other model. In this case, if you were, OT attack or ICS attack matrix only, it's actually going to potentially make your environmentally more risky, right? Because you're missing out on a lot of possibility, and we're about to explore that in a second, a little deeper. But when you talk about life and process safety, right? When you talk about the systems or the architecture that supports a safety system or a critical part of a refinery, if you're not, or refinery or power plant, if you're not considering kind of the whole corpus of, possibility out there, you're kind of leaving a lot of risk on the table, just out of biases. So let's jump into that. Let's explore why you're leaving a lot on the table there. So let's just consider right now a nation state. So let's take nation state X, right? In most nation states, right? Or I wouldn't say most, I would say a lot of the major nation states, when you look at how we study of them as an industry, there's commonly a split on two sides, right? There's kind of the military unit side. And if we look at this nation state in this example here, you have different groups, which have different attributions, maybe to different military units. This is a byproduct of things like the diamond model and other current threat intel approaches that cluster activities down to groups. We'll talk about the diamond model in a little bit next slide. That same nation state, you have foreign intelligence groups. And at a lot of the first world nations, a lot of the military and foreign intelligence groups overlap, right? People do assignments to either side. There are people that swap between. So while there might be a mission or a unit area that's specific on here, you have to remember there are multiple groups at the top. Similarly, if you're like, hey, I'm worried about nation state X, you also have to consider some of the other non-governmental groups, right? Your criminal actors, their cyber mercenary groups, both developing and doing ops out there. You have to consider things like Black Energy, which is a industrial event. The early tool, the first version of the tool, was written by criminal actors. It was out on Russian forums. Later versions, and there's some argument that version 2 and 3 might not be the same version as 1. There's a lot of people that put it together, so we're not drawing a conclusion either way, but we're saying you have this case to where sometimes criminal actors will start something on a forum, and then you have later versions of variations that get picked up by the top tier teams. Where this goes on this is you have to remember that cyber risk has to be calculated at the composite level. Because again, just like we said on the military unit example, people move, sometimes units work together. There is no bound on any of these groups on sticking in that model that we're focusing them under. So if you're saying I'm worried about nation state X, or I'm worried about, industry Y and what, these tier of nation states or organized groups are doing, if you're only considering the smallest unit of study that you're doing, you're going to miss out a lot of the tactics and techniques, and it's going to change all of those risk and probability equations. So, a bold statement here is the composite capability of the nation state or a well organized group matters, right? Um, this is especially tricky, like I said, because there are groups that are doing, you see like ransomware affiliates, right? How do you drag a ransomware affiliate, right, when they're paying for access, right? There are now people that are just selling access. There are now people selling tools, and so where really with this is that's important. And as you're modeling this out and as you're tying it to attack, you have to remember that this isn't just one group acting together. This is countries with budgets and priorities that can work together. And yes, they have bureaucracy, but it's this is a big ecosystem that you're actually defending or looking at. And Ron, what are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, it's back to the original quote, right? So, the model may not be exact, but the inspiration, where whether it comes from a criminal actor and then a military organization takes inspiration from that and pivots off of, really looking at even in the attack chain, what you'd call the act on objectives, that's really what matters. And so the composite or the group capability doesn't necessarily matters whether they started in ICS or they started in enterprise or it started as a ransomware op. Really, you have to calculate the entire risk. Otherwise, you're crippling yourself in an unnecessary way.
And where this ties, and we talked about a lot about groups for the last few minutes. Where this ties to the attack matrices is you have some groups that are on the ICS attack matrix that aren't on the enterprise. And you have some groups on the enterprise that might have done some ICS stuff at one time, um, along with groups from the same alleged nation state or from the same alleged organized group that aren't doing ICS. So, when you're doing these risk calculations, if you're doing a risk calculation above the group, you kind of have to have that relationship in mind. And so where this pushes to saying you really should use both matrices is realizing that if you want to catch the totality of capability to calculate the probability of the nation state or of the organized group, you have to consider that totality of both their intent and their capabilities. So again, yep. So not considering that composite possibility impacts the probability if they work together, right? There is nothing out there that limits APT28 from working with APT29 from working with Sandworm. And we also don't know, again, because so for those not familiar with the Diamond model, it is a model to where they basically take adversary intent at top. There's capability, which is kind of the tools or techniques they use, infrastructure, which is the IPs or domains or other things that they're coming from, and then the victim. A lot of times this is the sector, so it could be defense, it could be another area. A lot of groups say if two parts of a node change, then it becomes a different group, right? So, and per campaign, there's actually kind of different triangles. If you read the Diamond model for intrusion analysis paper, it goes into this bit, but um, that's to say that, again, a lot of these models are based on really the structure of these four things together. And so there is no guarantee that these aren't the same groups, and that while, yes, you might have never seen one of these groups in ICS, if they have the same adversary and they have the same victim, you could, they very much are capable of coming to the area. Infrastructure is a weird one just because, it can change. It can change so frequently. So, not considering the composite possibility of those impacts really does change that probability when we look at the graph and equations we talked about at the right. So, the boldest claim here is if you're going to calculate this composite risk properly and fully, you have to use both matrices. There's no way to get around using both matrices, particularly if it's a more nation state or a more bigger, well organized group, or like we were saying, if there's more actually attack groups at play. Ron, any other thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, they've uh, MITRE has done a great job of laying out uh, a framework for this is how people attack. It's kind of a choose your own adventure, and to not use both halves of the story just again seems absurd to me because in every example we have here or not even documented, there's always going to be multiple components to every attack. I don't think we're ever going to see in this day and age, especially focusing on industrial, something that's just a pure industrial attack. There's always going to be some enterprise component, whether it actually is in the enterprise enclave or not. There's enterprise components within the ICS, and it's just something that we can't avoid.
Awesome. So wrapping up, why you need to use both is if you only use one from that risk equation side, you're only going to capture partial part of that risk calculation. Um, those biases of either going all in on probability via threat intel can really mess you up on those type C ones, right? Those ones that either you underestimate and there actually are possible and very impactful. Because the attack is very optimistic. So undermining these and getting that false sense of security can be really dangerous. Um, Likewise, anchoring your probability only on events in one sector or one group's activities in one sector can be very dangerous, right? You have to consider really the totality of capability of that attacker, especially in OT or industrial environments where you do have those life and process safety risks. Because again, like we saw with the Mandiant graph from their blog, you have the vulnerability, the risk is there. You have to watch and you have to be responsible with how you calculate that probability side. Um, and then finally, that composite capability and that composite risk, you have to decide. You have to really use both matrices to accurately capture capabilities. Now, the probability of if nations, if military units, if government agencies work together in another government, who knows? That's not really my area to get probability into. But it's important to realize that it's possible, and that the at that point the calculations you're making are very opinionated on probability. So with that being said, definitely keep in touch. We're open to ideas. Ron, do you have any last thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, Dan, I'm not necessarily a supporter of going all in on ICS threat intel. I do think, and again, back to the original point, ICS attack, enterprise attack, or the enterprise attack models take that inspiration of what's probable or possible and actually laid it out for us in a map. Like it's an extremely valuable tool, and I think that the threat intel piece starts to bring into reality the probability of things. It's no longer just back when I was a pen tester. Hey, if I had a laptop, 6 months of time and the gumption to go attack the grid, I could probably do it. It doesn't have the same impact as nation states groups are doing this. We have evidence, and here's exactly how. And so that's why I love the combination of those two concepts to kind of get this better risk picture. And that's why it's still an absurd concept that you wouldn't use all of the mapping, all of the tools at your disposal just to say, well, that's enterprise's problem. So because we're industrial, enterprise attacks would never happen here. So let's just not even bring them to the forefront. And that used to be just frustrating as an advisor or a pen tester. You say, well, no, like, how do you think I'm going to gain my initial foothold, act on my objectives? It's not just about sending the stop CPU command or doing something industrial like. And so I think that's why it's important. And it's an important topic to keep rehashing on that we have these invaluable tools at our disposal. And there's no reason, no really good reason, in my opinion, to not use them. um, so yeah, but thank you for having me on the talk, and yeah, I look forward to doing it again.
Awesome. Thanks, Ron, and thanks for everyone for tuning in. And we'll see you next week.